Hi, everybody. Welcome to November's installment of BlueSciCon. I'm Jacob Puck-Misra. Thanks so much for joining us. This is the podcast that features the ideas, research, and philosophies of the members and friends of the Blue Marble Space Institute of Science. If you'd like to learn more about our institute, you can check us out online at bmsis.org. And to listen to previous editions of our podcast, you can go to bmsis.org/podcast. You can also search for us on iTunes. So thanks again for joining us. We have Haritina Mogosanu, our own Hari, joining us today. She is going to be talking about a master's project that she's been working on institutionalization and securitization. Specifically, she's looking at the role of institutionalization in space research, looking at NASA as a case study. So Hari, thanks so much for joining us. It's a really fascinating topic.
Greetings from New Zealand, and thank you for inviting me, and hello everyone.
So what got you interested in this topic to start with? Thinking about, you're thinking about NASA and an institutionalization. What does that mean? Why are you interested in it? And can you just help us unpack this a little bit?
I really love space, and I think humankind should become a spacefaring civilization. But I think it takes more than rockets to go out there. It takes vision and it takes systems thinking. It takes a whole village, as they say, to go out in space. And I have seen this when I first went to the Mars Desert Research Station in Utah, and we were there, and people from all culture, all colors, all religions, but most important from all sciences, and not even sciences, art and literature, and it was just a humankind in a nutshell. And I realized then that there is more than just a rocket to take us out. You have to have vision, you have to have ideas, and you have to have this know-how of how society works at large to be able to go to space in what we are. So that's kind of like prompted my research.
I see. And so one of the interesting distinctions that I noticed was you talk about institutionalization and you compare that to securitization. Now, they're not exact opposites, but how did these two factors contribute to how an organization like NASA developed?
Well, I think we first need to kind of step back a little bit and define both these terms, because they're very complicated, and people use institutionalization in very different ways. Institutionalization, the way I use it here, is kind of like, what do we do? What kind of rules and norms and regulations we're following in order to achieve a goal. And there is a definition that I quite like, which says that institutions are kind of like rule systems of interaction between people, because people create institutions. And so a lot of people talk about institutions and they refer to bureaucracy. And that's not what I had in mind. What I had in mind is this overall very high level definition. And an example of an institution is, for instance, here in New Zealand, we're driving on the left-hand side of the road, and that's an institution. I mean, people can drive on the right-hand side of the road, but then it's their choice, and it's not good. And so the state here supports driving on the left-hand side of the road. Another example of an institution is marriage. So you can choose to be married, and then again there are a set of rules and regulations and law that supports this institution. And my favorite example is English language. Now we ended up all speaking English, so English is an English language is an institution as well. And so this is the high definition, and then institution is there to support dreams and ideals. And then securitization, it's again a very interesting definition, because in this day and age we talk about securitization at level of state. So both these two terms are very high level definitions of the problem. And so what I think it is the difference is where institutions bind. You've got all these rules, and first you have someone dreaming something or someone finding out that some things are easier that way. So like I find it easy to speak the language, English language, because I can read more papers that are written by all people around the world who are speaking and writing in English language. So then I choose to do it. And this is the great thing about institutions. It's probably my favorite thing. It's that it gives you the choice. So once you're part of an institution, you have the choice to do a thing rather than something else. And so you're kind of like almost like in a scenario where you're limited by your choice as well, but that's also empowering because everyone else who chooses to do the same thing as you, they're supporting you in that journey. So then going to your question, institutionalization and securitization, they're kind of like, if you wish, like the plus and minus in sciences, right? Because institutionalization is binding, so we're creating these rules and we want to follow them. Whereas securitization, it's climbing. It's just climbing because that's very cool here. The right to break these rules. So when you go for a war, you are claiming the right to break the rules that are in function at that moment, so then you can do the work. And both are ideal. Both institutionalization and securitization are in the realm of ideal. They're both having discourses. So it's how you convince people at the end of the day to adhere to one or another.
Okay, so let's think about, I guess one thing that helped me think through this a little bit is the history of how humans got involved in space through the space race in the context of the Cold War. And you make some interesting comparisons between the development of the American space program and the development of the Soviet space program. So what I took away from that is the Soviet space program was a little bit more secretive in some ways and wrapped up more in this idea of securitization, whereas perhaps one of the reasons NASA has more long-term success is this more public appeal in its process of institutionalization. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, it's a very good characterization, and I grew up in a communist country. Romania at the time was a communist country, and nobody who was not in the military could accede to space research. It was just no way you would have done this kind of research if you were not in the military. And everyone knew that there is space research in my country, but everyone was keeping it secret. You weren't talking about it. It was reserved for the very, very few. And so imagine that it took me years to get my head around on how NASA operates and how the United States are operating in the space environment, because it was something I didn't understand, and we can kind of like almost go here in a discussion about biases and how humankind perceives it. But this is what happened to me. It took me a long time to understand how the other people, the free world, is operating. And I can tell you this: Soviet Union, Romania, all countries of the communist bloc, they were all doing space in secrecy. People were not publishing papers. Like, can you imagine this? We have these so many papers in science published in the U.S. about space and in the free world, right? And scientists are talking to each other, and they're having interesting conversations. Now imagine in the U.S. had to keep everything under the most terrible secret, and I think the difference between how things worked in the U.S. and how things worked in USSR had a lot to do with this kind of like secret, and it's about the mentality of the free world, if you wish. I have to say this. This is what I found out through my research, is just this way in which the U.S. is dealing with even with technology that allowed, I think, space research to be at the level that it is today. And then people from the communist bloc would see papers that were published, right, that were freely available online. Yes, you have to pay, but you don't have to kill someone to be able to read them, or be afraid that you're going to be killed if you talk about it. And this is the reality that we grew up in, and we have to talk about these differences in between the two worlds, because I don't know how many people know about it.
Well, no, you have a very unique personal perspective on that. I mean, certainly where you grew up in that time and place, that's really interesting to hear that perspective. So as I'm thinking about, what you identify as differences between, the American European approach and maybe what, the Soviet communist approach, are these things like NASA hiring contractors and technology transfers and things like that make space exploration directly relevant to the public? And are these the kinds of things that you don't really see in communist type space programs?
Yeah, it's like, like contractors, like, are you kidding me? I have never heard in my childhood of anything like this in back home. And for me, just the idea that someone can actually go and take a project from the government and go and develop it was extraordinary. So then it got me thinking. And to me, I believe, like today, that this is the reason why space, the institutionalization of space, succeeded. And here is another definition. People talk a lot about going to space, and most of the time, space has been linked to military, and like maybe 80% of, especially for me, coming again, I'm relating this to my background from that part of the world that I'm from. But for us, space was military, and that was it. There was nothing else out there. There was no civilian space research. And I mean, yes, there were some people looking at the sky with the telescopes, but they were just like insignificant, and that didn't matter. It didn't count as space research. And so in the Western world, it was the other way around. People would take contracts and they would develop them, and this contributed to promoting, to getting this forward. And so in this, what I'm saying in my research is that I personally believe that the institutionalization of space research has actually been made possible just after people had the choice of choosing to do space research for peaceful purposes. Because before that, you were doing space research, but you were doing it because you had to have a war advantage over someone else, right? So that was, to me personally, that was part of the machine of war before. Whereas as soon as people had the choice to say, oh, let's go and explore this, I don't know, moon of Saturn, just because we can and just because we want to, and there is no race involved, there is nothing there, we don't want to conquer it, we don't want to put the flag in first, we just want to know what's behind Titan's haze, right, in the atmosphere. That's extraordinary. That is true institutionalization. That is when humankind was able to choose its future, and that's the beauty of being and having this in an institution, because that supports the peaceful research of space, right? Whereas imagine this was done under the machinery of war.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I mean, with NASA being an agency whose goal is specifically the peaceful human exploration of space, that differs very much so from, well, the legacy of space exploration really came from rocketry and radar, and a lot of the machine of war is what led to what we now have as peaceful space exploration. One of the quotations you talk about that you mentioned in your discussion is the idea of NASA being a technocracy, in the sense of this institution that is designed to systematically generate new knowledge and improve upon technology. I thought that was a really interesting way of putting it, and it made me just think about what other institutions there are other than NASA that really do that. NASA might be one of the very few.
This is very interesting, and if we go back again, step back again, NASA is a civil institution, is a government machinery. I work for the government too here in New Zealand. It's interesting to see how actually government operates and how we do that. But here is the thing. NASA was not created for space. It's very interesting. NASA was created to make sure that disasters like Sputnik doesn't happen. That was a very interesting definition. And NASA was made in response to a threat. And it's this beautiful discussion about, I was talking to a friend of mine here in New Zealand the other day, and we were talking about serendipity. When you start doing things and then something else happens in the chain of events, and then you end up doing something completely different than what you have planned on the beginning. And this is true science. This is true development. So NASA being formed was made with this systems thinking in mind, and there are beautiful papers written by RAND that was is a think tank there in the U.S. that are looking at the general picture. And what struck me was the fact that it takes systems thinking to go to space, and it takes systems thinking to go to war, right? So there's these two parallel things, two most important things to develop space research and go to war. So then the war knowledge was transferred into the systems thinking, and it came with a lot of technological development. That's why these authors, they're calling it a technocracy. It's putting technology and the development of research in everything in science to serve the state. And it was a visionary thing that they've done it. And again, the think tank of RAND has helped, because RAND had produced that very, very famous report in, I think it was 1946, when they said that the U.S. should put a satellite in space, and then nothing happened, right, for many years, and then Sputnik came. And it is true that, society today is conducive to technology. We are technology and we are information, and we have to deal with it because we are making history every single day of our life. We haven't done these things before. It's not like we know what we're doing. We don't. And it's up to us to find this equilibrium. It's up to us to find the best way to move forward. But I don't think we can move forward unless we have an ideal. And what's that ideal? I think this is something we need to think about and collectively engage.
I really like that. So I guess one of the other things I think about is, NASA has no shortage of critics, of course, and anytime there's a disaster, the Challenger, the Columbia shuttle, things like that, there's a public connection to NASA, and so there's public outcry when there's disasters like that. Does this show fundamental weaknesses in the institutionalization of NASA, or is this really showing us that space exploration is still very high risk? And more generally, how do we interpret NASA's failures in these cases as, what does that mean for the future of other space institutions?
This is a very good question. Thank you for this question. I really like it, because when I started doing this thesis, my supervisor came to me and she said, I want to know, and I want you to tell me, why is it that NASA stopped doing space research, and why is it that is not doing research as it used to do in the Apollo era? What happened there? And I thought about it, and to me it was this finding our feet problem. But then once I started looking more into the nature of things, I realized that we shouldn't even be concerned with whether we would be, or NASA would be going back to moon first, or what's going to happen, because what they've done there, so NASA started in a process that was, let's make sure that disasters like Sputnik don't happen. So this was the very first task of NASA, right? And that's a very big difference between that and, say, for instance, astrobiology, which now comes with questions like, what is life? What is the future of humankind, right? So these are completely different questions. And I think that NASA has made possible for humankind to kind of lift off the ground. This is what their merit is. And it didn't do it. I don't believe that NASA did it because really wanted to do it. It was not like on their agenda when they were first formed. I mean, it was very clear. Disasters like Sputnik shouldn't happen. But in the process, somewhere, something happened that actually changed the course of space research and how we see space. And I believe, this is what my research showed me, I believe that what happened was this amazing way of the U.S. and of the free world to give free rein to people, to take the development of technology. The government comes and makes an infrastructure, and there are examples in there like the railroad or the telephony. See, these things in the communist bloc we've never heard about. And so then people develop the technology because they care about, because they have a vested interest. So NASA had the infrastructure for space, but then something happened in the process, and because it's so hard to go to space, they came with a lot of innovation back, and they're like, all right, how do we make these gloves to fit perfectly? How do we protect people from vacuum? How do we make sure they survive on the space station? So all these questions that they had to resolve in going to space because they had to make a race, these like the byproducts. I believe that these were the keys that institutionalized space research in the true meaning of the word. So then having that under the belt, that allowed humankind to start thinking. And there were people who were seeing benefits in this. My favorite discovery is this face cream. It's a beauty cream. It's called Rejuvel, and it's on the NASA spin-off, and it makes women look younger and men look younger. And I think it's an extraordinary discovery. So this is something out of the blue. That has, maybe you say, has nothing to do with space research, right? It's just in the beauty and cosmetics industry. But you know what? I'm very happy it happened, and I'd be very happy to give it a try and invest and buy it and make sure that because that's what promotes humans are humans, right? These space spin-offs, and this is just an example, and I thought it was an interesting and a funny one, right? Because it just shows our humanity, if you wish, and quest in very different directions. But I think that's what NASA did, and I don't think we should expect anything from NASA. Really, NASA is a government department. Now, every government department, and again, I'm working in one of them, has bureaucracy. It has bureaucracy because it inherited a certain way of dealing with things. And I think this was, to answer your question, maybe the doom and the very good part about space being directed from an institution like NASA that belongs to the government, because it had rules, it had regulations. But on the other hand, being a government department, it had too many of them. So what we're dealing with here in the government, and I believe this is the situation. I don't know if there is any government in the world who doesn't have it. Is hierarchy, and how do you communicate on a hierarchy? See, you have top down, but then you have the layers, and how do people relate to each other? What are the channels? Because nobody kind of really knows in a way, and that's another very interesting discussion. Again, we're making history. We are now collaborating. I'm collaborating with peers from other government departments in here in my country, and I'm talking to them directly. And I think to myself, this is really cool. I can talk to someone freely about these problems that we're facing, and I don't have to go to my boss to allow me to talk to that person, right? Now, think about this. In a communist country, this is unheard of. You don't talk to anyone. It's almost like bureaucracy and institutionalization is kind of coming from a military hierarchy. And what we're doing now, we're diffusing that. And we're kind of like shifting it and putting it into the networking. And that's another interesting subject. The future of humankind is in many ways of organization, but one of them, which arose after internet was put out there, it's networking. And networking gives you the ability to communicate with communities of interest. So you've got a community of practice, and overall you have a community of interest. And I give this as an example. I give astrobiology as an example. astrobiology is an umbrella, and it contains people who are very active in different disciplines, and we all form a community of interest in this astrobiology field. So again, coming back to the question, yes, there were flaws, there were disasters, there was the Challenger, it's true, there were all those other issues. But it's not just that communication. It's not just, people learn from mistakes, and it's sad that we do that. But sometimes in the process, this is what happens. I think the key today is how we react to those mistakes, right? Whereas I don't think in the past, if someone died, anyone would have made such a big fuss, right? And even in the recent past, go back again in Romania and Russia, people were training to become astronauts. People were dying, A lot of technology was failing. People were dying, and people really didn't care. But what I liked about NASA and their approach was that they care about people. They care about safety. They are coming up with ways of making sure that every single life matters, that every single thing that is happening there in space, it's taken care of in a proper way, and people are taken care of. Life is the most important, individual life, if you wish, is the most important thing for this kind of research. And I think this is extraordinary, coming from a country where humans were expandable to this philosophy that every single life is important, and we must make sure that we're taking care of it. And that's why there was such a big fuss made about these disasters, right? And I think this is great. It's great that people are thinking like that, because every single one of us are unique, and every single one of us has this enormous potential, and we can individually contribute to this humankind knowledge.
So, okay, well, thank you for that. So you've definitely convinced me that the institution of NASA has done actually a really, really good job in some ways I hadn't thought about before of I guess, approaching doing a systems approach to space exploration. So the one question I'm left with is, what are the lingering security aspects of NASA? To what extent does NASA still have a role in securitization? What I'm thinking is, suppose that China gets off the ground and starts a real human Mars exploration program. Would that kind of event today have the same impact that the launch of Sputnik had in the 60s? And would NASA then be revitalized, do you think, in a way that is responding more to security concerns than science, if we perceived, for example, China to be a competitor?
That's a good question again. Well, let's talk a little bit about securitization and what does it mean. And securitization is a process, just like institutionalization. And it's got three things. You need three things to do securitization. You need a reference object. And what's a reference object? It's that which is in danger, right? So in classical security, the reference object is the state. Then you need an actor, we call them actors, or an agent that says, hey, this reference object is in danger of something happening to it, right? And if we don't take such and such action, this and this will happen. So it's all in the future tense. And then the third thing you need for securitization is an audience. And I give you an example of securitization. It's when President Kennedy went and did the speech to the Congress. He had, the reference object was the freedom, as value from which was threatened by the communism. So he was the actor. Then the audience was the Congress, right? He didn't go there to say, hey, can we have some money to do some research and development to go to the moon because it's really cool and we really want to do some research and want to find out about, these rocks and how we were made and what's life about. He never said that, but he said we need to be free and we need to make sure that the Russians don't win this race. So this is very, very important. Now, security has been developing as well, because everything every single institution, and security is an institution too, if you wish, is developing. And some institutions fail. Some institutions, they just cease to exist because they're not viable. Some institutions are viable, which is why I'm always saying, space may or may not be, or it may take another approach to go there. But we're on the beginning. We're still finding our feet. We haven't even planned to go to space for science. In the normal day and age. Yes, Leonardo da Vinci dreamed about, Jules Verne dreamed about, Robert Goddard, Hermann Oberth, and Konstantin Tsiolkovsky. They dreamed about going to space to do science, right? But then there were very few at the time, whereas now we can actually achieve that. So securitization also goes through changes and transformation. And before, when we had the Cold War, when we had the real, the World War, on that time, securitization was about state. So the state was the most important reference object, right? Now, in this day and age, things have changed, and the scholars that are doing international security, they're obviously arguing, and they're pushing to extend the purpose, the scope of the reference object. So now you have the reference object as being the environment, and the environment is under threat from climate change. You can say the reference object is Earth if you think about like an asteroid disaster and the planetary planetary defense side of the things, right? So this is another reference object. But what I found that these scholars argue is that after the Cold War was over, the most important thing in securitization is actually diffusing. So in order to keep things secure, the most important, the key is de-securitization, right? And this is where I think NASA has a role. And I'm saying that, NASA, I don't think NASA plans to be the savior of the world. I don't think NASA really planned, truly and honestly, I don't think they were planning to from the beginning to do this. It's obvious from all the materials and data that I have researched that they were there to make sure that the Russians don't get ahead in the race that was. But as I was saying before, in the process, something happened, and because they gave this knowledge to people, it was not NASA that made this possible. It was the people who made it possible, because they said, oh, you know what, I love space. Let's think about this. Let's do more space. Let's engage more in this. But what NASA did, it provided a framework under which these developments were possible. Because it's one thing if we're just like individual people and we're like running around and I'm very passionate about space. It's really, really cool. I talk about space all the time, but I don't have any framework. I really wish I could contribute, but I don't know how. Whereas here is a project, here's a space spin-off, let's develop it. Let's go plant in space, right? That's something I'm interested in. Let's go plant in space. Let's see how they work, how they're doing. So you already have something concrete that people can relate to rather than just an ideal. So I think in terms of de-securitization, it's giving people to think about, something to think about, right? So what about instead of going to war and doing all those wars around the world and doing drug traffics and, all the atrocities that are happening around the world, we could give people something to think about. And they can think about anything from how they can make beauty creams to how they can, it's like, what's in it for me? What's in it for me? And if you can touch that chord in people's hearts and they can see the benefits, then I think your de-securitization is kind of like happening. So instead of thinking about war, and again, institutionalization and securitization are really kind of like top level processes. It's not you and I as a person that are dealing with it, but they're dealt with at the level of state or at the level of enterprise or organization. But securitization especially is dealt with at the level of state. So this is like kind of like, how do we diffuse it? If there are less people intaking the war, And I'm like, what happened in France? We all know what just happened in France. So it's how do we defuse that? How can we prevent that thing from happening? You know, if we present science to kids and engage them in science and get them to think about how they can make the world a better place, maybe they will stop fighting with each other. Maybe they will stop arguing, and maybe their attention will be on something else. Whereas a lot of people's attention right now is on conflict and who's right. You know, like it's a good point. Who's right? But is it really that important? Or is it more important to understand these fundamental questions like, you know, what is life and who are we? Because that's what actually space is trying to answer. So coming back to this referent object, right? What's the referent object? What is the value that the institution of space is trying to protect? What is it? You know, that's a very, very good question. And I personally believe it's life, human life. How do we survive? We're amazing. I love all the time. I love to think about people and what a universe we have inside ourselves, and we can create so much beauty in the world and so many bad things as well. But it's all part of our human nature and who we are. And I would love to see that this survives. And I think that to date, the space institutions in its entirety is the most qualified institution to take this forward. Now, yes, there would be competition. The people going to Mars now, the new Mars race instead of the moon race, I don't know, is not the same. It's not the same as in the Apollo time, because the Apollo time was totally or mostly militarized. So that's why I said in my research that I believe that the institution of space research actually took off after the civilian space research was possible. But like if we look at China, you know, China wants to get a spot in there. So this is competition between states. So this is where securitization comes in. You can see, you know, China as a state wants to go to Mars. It's not China as part of the United Nations want to go to Mars. They want to go to Mars and claim a spot for themselves. And, you know, I don't think things will work like this. I think things would work when people will, you know, a Chinese person and a Romanian person and a U.S. person and a, I don't know, New Zealand person will work together in a network and think about, right, how can we get to Mars? What's the best way to get there? You know, why should we compete? We shouldn't compete. We should work together. But I think, again, it's an interesting, RAND has awesome papers. I love reading their papers, and they talk about this networking, and networking, I think is the key for the future. Because networking allows people to share the same values. You know, you're not compelled to listen to your mom when she tells you, you know, whatever she wants you to do, right? You can go and chat with your friend online and say, oh, I don't want to do this, and what do you think? So it creates it opens up. Networking opens up space for people who have the same ideals, who have the same, they're convinced that they have to do the same thing, share common values in an unprecedented way, And although I think there would be states that would compete, like India is going out there, and this is really good. It's good when there is competition. Competition creates progress. But I think still that the future of humankind will lay in networks, and I think it's up to us as leaders of this kind of like new world to see in the future and kind of come up with what is the best way to make sure that these people not only can talk about themselves, because if you wish like that, they can go to conventions, they can go to society meetings, you know, but what is the framework that we can provide for these people, we as an organization can provide for these people to engage them in their interaction to promote humanity forward? And one answer might be citizen science, right? Another answer is true research and development, where you do this as a job from whatever 24/7, right? I don't know what's the answer, but I think this is the question.
Well, thank you. I really like this idea that that space exploration is maybe one of the best poised institutions to try to usher in, some sort of new era of a peaceful vision for the world. I mean, I don't want to get too optimistic that we're going to achieve world peace by sending people into space, but I completely agree that that's a very needed perspective, and that if anything, maybe space exploration holds some of the keys to make some of that happen. I really like the idea that space exploration, which really emerged from the machine of war, perhaps could be used to undo some of that damage. So any final questions for Hari? It's been a really great conversation. Sandra, did you have anything to add?
It's hard to follow up Hari's discussion on her optimism is really contagious. Thank you for that, Hari. Perhaps the one thought I wanted to add to the distinction of the success of institutionalization versus securitization is perhaps the fact that in institutionalization, the roots of the economy of space weave in much further into the local economy of a locality of a country than do more secure type environments. As in for NASA, you have very large amount of contractors who themselves have subcontractors. So the economy that drives the space program is actually very hard to quantify because it is so weaved into the economy of the country. I mean, you have your little parts supplier down the road providing parts to this company that provides hardware to NASA. So it's extremely broad, and perhaps that builds a much stronger root for the long duration success of a space program. So there's just some additional thoughts on the benefit of institutionalization versus security.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is the future, and that's why I also agree with that statement that says the future is in de-securitization and defusing, and it's commerce, it's trade, it's people taking their fate in their own hands and saying, look, we want to do more science, we want more research, we want more. I mean, who doesn't want to live forever, right?
Right. So what is your perspective then on the emerging Chinese space program, which is a communist country, but I think they're not. I don't really know. Maybe they're not as secure as the former Soviet program. Secure being in a sense of securitization, like you were saying. But perhaps you have some perspective on the Chinese program.
There is an interesting book about the Chinese fleet that was. I think it was in 1400, and this general when the Chinese sent this general to navigate, and in 1400 or 1300, around that time, they had the most advanced fleet in the world. They had huge ships, they had amazing navigation capability. The Chinese were the best navigators in the world. And they made it almost all the way around Africa, if I'm not mistaken. And when they got almost to discover Europe, there was something happened in China, and the emperor was overthrown, and some other emperor came in, and he wanted to build an irrigation dam, and he didn't really care about exploration, and so they kind of like deferred to bureaucracy. That's why I'm like saying here, bureaucracy versus institutionalization, they're kind of like two different things. And I think bureaucracy is the bad guy. It was a good guy for a while, but that's the real bad guy is bureaucracy, not institutionalization. And so they were called back. And then a few years later, another emperor came in, and then they sent the fleet again, and they constructed the fleet again, and then they went into exploration, and then they were called back. And that stuck with me, that image of this humongous fleet. At the time, Europe couldn't even build any. Europe was consumed by war in 1300, 1400. Couldn't even move, and let alone travel. And then the Portuguese started traveling a little bit, but none of those ships from Europe compared to the magnificence of the Chinese fleet. Yet they failed to discover Europe, or they didn't want to. They said, that emperor said that he actually didn't need to go and do these discoveries, but all he wanted was that his irrigation dam was better than some other irrigation things, and he was self-sufficient, and he was very happy. So it comes again to, I think, to geography and how people are ingrained in their culture. In China and, even Romania, we have a lot of rules. I kind of like ran away from home. I didn't run away from home. I'm in a learning process, but if you wish, I ran away from those rules because they were so oppressive that I didn't understand at the time what I was doing. But then that's the beauty of the free world. You go in another country, and you know how people say, like Italians and the Latin people, like Romanians, everyone. You've got this mother figure all the time that tells you what to do and tells you how to behave and tells you what to wear and tells you what to talk about. And so people in the free world kind of like run away from that. They run away from the cultural oppression of so many rules. And these rules were good. That's what I think culture is just a set of rules. Because these rules were keeping you alive in that particular geographical conditions where you were from. But then if you go to a different environment, you have to behave differently. And it takes a long time to kind of like make sense of that. Like I'm here in New Zealand and we're celebrating Christmas in the summertime. And it just, for me, is just outrageous, right? I can't process it. My brain can't process it. So imagine people go to another geography and all of a sudden those rules that keep you alive in your country are not good anymore. Like if you go in Sahara, for instance, in the middle of the desert and you try to eat pork, you die because it's toxic. Not because it's holy or sacred or it is toxic to the humans to consume pork in such high temperatures. But these rules are so old that they're now ingrained in these cultural ways of doing things. So for space, for us to go into space, we will have to shed all that programming. And that's the hardest thing because it comes back to biases and it comes back to survival. And when something is in your brain because it's been ingrained in your survival mechanism, it's really, really hard to shed. And it's really, really hard to see the other side of the coin as well.
All right. Well, Hari, thank you very much. This has been a really, really fun conversation. Definitely given me a lot to think about. So I wish you the best of luck as you continue your research, as you finish up your master's project. We're definitely looking forward to seeing how that takes shape. Thanks again for joining us. Listeners, thank you for tuning in. This has been BlueSciCon. You can again check us out online at bmsis.org/podcast. This will be our last episode for 2015. So we will see you next year. Thanks again.
Thank you.